Okay, we're going to get into your third video now. This is dealing with the Electoral College. We're still into the presidency. So the three branches, we're still working on the executive branch. What we're going to look at here is how is the President of the United States elected? And the voters do not actually vote for the President of the United States. I'm sure most of you already know that. We give our preference as to who we want as President of the United States. We do vote directly for every other office, but not for the President. The Founding Fathers wanted it that way because they did not want the common man, the common citizen, voting for the president. They wanted the very best and brightest people. So they created this electoral college where every state would have their choice of electors. Those were party officials within the two parties who would then be in control of and in charge of the college. And so then when the election would come about, these electors then would vote as to who their choice was between the candidates. Now, traditionally, and basically how it follows pretty much most of the time, the electors follow what you and I vote. So in the state of Kansas, if the majority of the voters vote for candidate A, then our state electors will also vote for candidate A, but they don't have to. And we have had a couple presidents' elections in our past history where we have had presidents elected by the Electoral College who was not picked by the people. All states except two, Maine and Nebraska, select electors that is based on a winner of the popular vote. Maine and Nebraska are a little different. Theirs is basically broken up. So in Nebraska, for example, who has 4 electoral votes altogether, they I'm sorry, 5. They break theirs up to where let's say candidate A gets 40% of the vote and candidate B gets 60%, then the 5 electors are split, where candidate B, who got 60%, would get 3, and candidate A would get 2 then. So it's not a winner-take-all system in those two states. It's more of a proportional system. A lot of states are looking at doing that, which if they do, it could totally change how the election system is done in this country, and that could have a lot of ramifications, which we'll probably talk more about in class. The electors meet in the state capitals on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December. Now remember, you and I go vote in November, so therefore our vote has already been done and has been long past. They then come in December at the state capitals across the United States, and they get to vote on both the president and vice president. This is also why we wait till January for the president to be sworn in, because we have to wait actually by constitutional law for these electors to go vote in December. On January 6th, the electoral votes are then cast and counted by the President of the Senate, and by the President and Vice President are then formally elected. If no candidate wins the majority of the electoral vote, which needs 270, and where they get that number from is there are 435 House members, there are 100 senators. You add that up and that becomes 535. Then there are 3 from the District of Columbia, so now you have 538. In order to be President of the United States, you must get 1 over the majority. Well, you split 538 in half, and that's where you get 270 then. If no candidate would get the magic number of 270, then the election is supposed to go to the House of Representatives by Constitution. The House then gets to vote. Now, all 435 members do vote, but they vote as a state. So even though California has 54 House members, they only get to count as 1 vote, because they vote as a group. So Kansas has the same amount of power as California, as New York, and others, because they all just count as 1. So there's 50 votes then for the presidency. Basically, over the years, political historians and others have looked at the Electoral College and have found 3 major defects with it. It is possible to win the popular vote in the presidential election, but not lose the Electoral College vote. This has happened, like I said, 4 times in our nation's history. The most recent in 2000, where Al Gore, a Democrat, won the popular vote, but he did not win the electoral vote until George Bush became president. Nothing in the Constitution nor in federal statute requires the electors to vote for the candidate favored by the popular vote. So again, even though the popular vote, you and I vote one way, it could be that the electors, for whatever reason, decide to go another way. And this is where we're getting into a lot of problems, especially now, because there's a lot of states that are really tinkering with their election systems here. And there could be some issues of fraud, abuse, and other issues coming up here in the next couple of presidential elections, and especially as close these presidential elections have been over the last couple terms. This could become a really, really huge issue. And again, it's hard for us to fathom this, but if you would think about it, if our election system gets sabotaged or messed up, or there is some fraud done in it, that would be enough at this point in time where we have such high tensions between the two parties that could erupt that into violence. And that could be the downfall of the United States as that comes into play. The third major flaw of the Electoral College is if no candidate gains a majority of the Electoral College, the election then is thrown into the House. This has happened twice. In this process, each state is given only one vote, as I mentioned before. The problem here is that it doesn't become an equal representation of the vote. So states like California, as I said, which are huge populated states, they're only the same amount in terms of power as like a state like Kansas. That isn't really true representation. So again, a lot of people who argue that we need to change our election system believe that we need to get rid of the Electoral College and replace it with a different system. But that right now is not even a foreseeable answer, and so at this point we'll kind of let it go. Well, what about the vice presidency? The Constitution only gives the vice president two duties, and we talked about these already. One shall be if he becomes president of the United States, if the president has to be removed or steps down. But other than that, he only presides over the Senate, which we talked about, and he gets to decide the question of presidential disability. The keys to choosing a good vice president, what are some things that a presidential candidate looks for? One of the most important things is what's called balancing the ticket. And what that means is if I'm a presidential candidate and I'm from the South, I'm going to look for a vice presidential candidate probably from the North in order to gain support from that up part of the territory. If I am a staunch, hard conservative Republican, I may want to pick a running mate who's a much more softer, maybe mainstream, so I can pick up independent votes. Location is a very big part of it. I want to find somebody from a good-sized state so I know that that person's going to win that state for me and help me win. I also want to look at a candidate who has strong name recognition. This was the downfall when it came to the vice presidential candidate choice that was done by a couple of years ago when John McCain ran for the Republicans. He picked a lady by the name of Sarah Palin. And at the time, she was not a very well-known governor at all. She was from Alaska. Nobody really knew who she was. Now, of course, today, everybody pretty much knows who she is. But back then, they didn't. And so that caused a lot of problems for the Republicans. And among other things, she really didn't have a lot of power. She didn't have a lot of knowledge. She was not a good choice. But those are things that a vice president must be in order to make a good choice for the president. The virtue of ideology, experience, knowledge, and world respect are also key vital things. And again, like I mentioned, Sarah Palin just wasn't one of those. If the office of vice president becomes vacant, the president nominates a new vice president subject to approval of Congress. Today, the vice president performs a lot of duties. This one here, Joe Biden, has been a very powerful vice president for the Barack Obama's administration. And again, you can go back in history and look at many other vice presidents that have had a lot of power and a lot of control over the years, especially in the recent history, where we've had some people like Dick Cheney and others who are vice presidents who are very powerful. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about today is dealing with what about succession to the presidency. Well, the 25th Amendment deals with this. It ratified in 1967. It made it clear that the vice president will become president if the president is removed from office. The Presidential Succession Act was created in 1947. Now, this was before the 25th Amendment. What it did is it set forward an order of succession following the vice president. The question came up of what would happen if both the president and vice president should die. There really wasn't anything in the Constitution that verified that. So in 1947, they started a list creating of a succession act in case both the president and vice president was not able to fulfill their duties. And this list goes through all the secretary cabinets and the rest of those. Pretty much here is the list that you can see. It starts with the vice president, then the speaker, president pro tem, and then it goes through all the different secretaries then. So basically, this is the list of succession for who becomes president if both the president and vice president would die. The 25th Amendment, dealing with presidential disability and succession, has a couple other key parts to it. The reason why the 25th Amendment was created is because really in the Constitution all it said is that the vice president shall take over the duties of the president. It did not specify he would take over or she would take over the actual job as president. So the 25th Amendment had to clarify that, and that's what it did in Sections 1 and 2. Sections 3 and 4 of the amendment basically provides for a procedure if the president's not dead, but what if he is disabled or unconscious or in a coma? What happens then? Well, basically, the vice president is to become the acting president if the president informs Congress in writing that he is unable to discharge his powers. Now, the question comes up: what happens if the president of the United States falls and hits his head and falls into a coma, and he didn't sign any paper? Well, technically, under the 25th Amendment, the vice president could not take over. So one of the first things that the President of the United States will do when he comes into office is he will sign a paper. It's just not formally dated into signature, but the President of the United States will formally sign the document, and then he puts it aside. This way, we have the security of knowing that if something happens to the president, the vice president can take over as the duty of the president. The vice president and a majority of members of Congress can also go to Congress, the cabinet can go to Congress, and in writing, they can go ahead and say that the President of the United States is no longer able to fit the office of president and needs to be removed. Now, this has never been done in our nation's history, but it could. Possible reasons for this: maybe it would be dealing with the President of the United States suffers some type of brain damage, if the President of the United States, for whatever reason, goes into a mental disorder, if the President of the United States has some type of trauma. Let's say that his kids, his children get kidnapped by terrorists. Well, there the President's clearly not in the right frame of mind, so therefore he would not be able to act as a rational president, and so then the vice president and the members of the cabinet can get together and decide he needs to be removed. Alright, with that we're going to finish this part of the video, and we have one last video left to do over this unit and get you ready for your test.